Jerusalem burned beneath a sky the color of blood. Bells rang and broke. The air was thick with ash, incense, and the sound of men calling God's name while doing his opposite. The year was 1099, the day of deliverance or of judgment. No one could tell which. The Crusaders had breached the walls at dawn, and by dusk the holy city screamed. Sir Raymond de Vaux moved through the flames as through a dream. His sword was wet, his breath dry, his armor heavy with the dust of the conquered. The streets were rivers of fire. The smell of blood and myrrh mixed until he could no longer tell one from the other. He had waited years for this moment, to take the city of God. Yet all he felt was the emptiness of victory. The cries of women echoed from a stone alley. He turned, sword drawn, expecting resistance, but saw only a trail of smoke rising from what had been a convent. The wooden doors hung open, half burned. The sign of the cross above them blackened, but unfallen. He hesitated. This was no fortress. There was no honor in what waited beyond that door. Still he entered. The inside was a furnace. Flames crawled along the tapestries. The rafters moaned. Through the firelight he saw bodies. Nuns, children, the dead laid like offerings on the floor. And at the far end, near the altar, one figure still moved. A woman stood there, robes scorched, hair unbound, holding a small wooden crucifix against her chest. Her face was calm, untouched by fear. When she saw him, she did not flee. "Are you come to finish what they began?" she asked, her voice low, steady. Raymond froze. The heat stung his eyes. "I am sent to cleanse this city," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "Then cleanse your soul first," she whispered. A section of the roof collapsed behind him, sparks filling the air like swarming angels. He stepped forward, raising his blade. She did not move. The crucifix gleamed red in the firelight, half burning, half shining. "Do you not fear death?" he asked. She shook her head. "I fear only to die faithless." Her calm unnerved him. He had seen men beg, curse, pray, but never one who met death as if greeting it. His arm trembled. The sword's edge wavered before her throat. "If I die," she said softly, "tell him I wasn't afraid." The words struck deeper than any weapon. He tried to speak, but the fire roared louder, drowning language. The crucifix in her hand began to blacken. She closed her eyes, whispering psalms between breaths. He stood there, the heat pressing against his armor, his faith turning to smoke. He had fought for this, for the cleansing of the holy city. Yet now, in front of her, it felt like desecration. He lowered the sword. It clanged against the stone, loud and final. The nun opened her eyes. In them he saw not fear, not even pity, but something worse: recognition. She saw him as he truly was, a man who believed too much in his own salvation. The flames closed around them. He took her arm, pulled her toward the doorway as the roof began to give way. Together they stumbled into the courtyard, the night air a mercy. She fell to her knees, coughing. He turned to face the church. It was a torch now, roaring into the sky. "Why did you not kill me?" she asked between breaths. "Because you were not the enemy," he said. She looked up at him, eyes shining with tears and firelight. "Then who is?" He had no answer. Behind them, the convent's bell tower collapsed. The sound rolled through the city like thunder, like judgment. In the distance, crusaders shouted triumph as the Temple Mount fell. The city of God was theirs, and utterly lost. Raymond stared at the crucifix in her hands. Half of it was burned black, half still golden. Smoke curled from its edges like a prayer rising without words. He whispered, "May God forgive what we have done." The nun closed her eyes again, whispering something he could not hear. Perhaps a blessing, perhaps a curse. The wind shifted, sparks lifted into the red night. And somewhere beyond the walls, the bells of Jerusalem stopped ringing, as if heaven itself had turned away. They called it the Year of Redemption, though it smelled of rot and dust. The First Crusade had begun 4 years earlier in the cold churches of France, where Pope Urban's voice thundered across the pews, Deus vult, God wills it. Farmers became soldiers. Sinners became pilgrims. Every wound they inflicted they called sacred. Every death an offering. The promise was simple. Fight for the Holy Sepulchre, and heaven would open its gates. But the road to Jerusalem was paved not with prayer, but bones. Men starved crossing Anatolia, drank rain from their helmets, buried their children in foreign dust. When they reached Antioch, they devoured their own dead. Yet through every famine, every fever, they whispered the same words, Jerusalem awaits. By the time the Crusaders reached its walls in 1099, they were less an army than a hunger. The city shone before them like prophecy fulfilled. Golden domes, white stone, a light so pure it seemed to promise forgiveness. For 7 weeks they starved and bled at its gates, praying that God still remembered their names. On the morning of July 15th, they breached the walls. Raymond of Toulouse led the first assault, Tancred the second. When the gates fell, no one shouted victory, only release. Years of prayer exploded into violence. The streets of Jerusalem ran red before noon. No one was spared. The chronicles say, 10,000 died, but numbers cannot count faith gone blind. The knights rode through smoke and screams, singing hymns over the sound of slaughter. They said the blood in the temple reached to their knees. They called it miracle. The priests walked behind them, sprinkling holy water on the corpses. Some said it hissed when it touched the ground. To the west, the dome of the rock burned. To the north, the synagogues collapsed. The people of the city, Jews, Muslims, Christians of the East, were all caught in the same fire. Jerusalem was supposed to be the bride of Christ. Instead, she became his widow. Sir Raymond de Vaux entered the city at dusk. His sword was dull from use, his cross dark with soot. The air glowed red, not sunset, but blood turned to light. He rode past bodies and banners, past men laughing like mad prophets, past priests thanking God for mercy while standing in its absence. He dismounted near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the goal of every crusader's dream. He thought he would feel salvation when he saw it. Instead, he felt nothing. The bells rang hollow, the hymns out of tune. The church doors were open, but the presence of God felt gone. He whispered to himself, "We have taken his tomb, but not his heart." In the streets, his brothers sang the Te Deum. One held up a severed hand and called it relic. Another smeared his face with blood, shouting, "This is the baptism of victory." Raymond turned away. He could not look. He could not breathe. The fire in the distance was rising, a convent burning. A woman's cry carried through the smoke. He told himself it was only another heretic's den, another necessary cleansing. But something in the sound made him stop. That was when he heard the bell, one single faint toll, breaking through the roar of the city. It came from the east, from the small church near the market. He felt its echo in his chest. He should have turned toward the sepulchre to pray. Instead, he followed the bell. When he reached the convent gates, they were half consumed, the cross above them glowing like coal. He stepped inside, sword ready, heart unsure. He told himself he was still God's soldier, but part of him already knew. He had crossed from holy duty into judgment. That night, when he knelt beside the nun amid the flames, he would understand the truth that history never wrote, that the First Crusade did not end with Jerusalem's capture. It ended when one man refused to kill in God's name. The city was conquered, but heaven remained silent. And in that silence, faith began to break. Sir Raymond de Vaux was born among vineyards and river mist, far from the deserts of prophecy. His father was a baron of small renown, his mother a woman who prayed more than she spoke. He grew up hearing the priests say that sin could be washed away by service to the cross. So when the call of Urban II thundered through Christendom, he knelt, kissed the relic, and swore to fight for heaven. He left behind vineyards, a chapel bell, and the promise of peace. He had been a soldier long before he was a pilgrim. He knew how to kill, but not how to pray after killing. The crusade taught him both, or tried to. At first, faith was simple. The enemy was the devil, victory the voice of God. But after Antioch, simplicity died. He saw hunger make beasts of saints, saw men steal bread from widows and still call themselves blessed. He heard sermons that turned blood into sacrament. Each victory left him smaller. In battle, he was fearless. In prayer, he trembled. He began to fear not the Saracen's blade, but the silence between his own prayers, a silence that grew each year like a shadow behind his faith. When the Templars were formed, Raymond joined them not for glory, but for penance. Their vows of purity and obedience promised order to his doubt. The sword became his confession, the cross on his cloak his disguise. He told himself he fought for the redemption of others, but secretly hoped that by killing, he could kill his own shame. He carried a psalter bound in leather, a gift from his mother. Inside, she had written in a delicate hand, "God is not found in conquest, but in mercy." He never showed it to his brothers. They would have called it weakness. In camp, he kept to himself. While others gambled, he sat near the fire sharpening his blade and staring at the flames as if trying to remember why they burned. When asked if he feared death, he said, "No, I fear what waits beyond it." On the march to Jerusalem, he was often the first to rise, the last to rest. His discipline earned respect, his silence suspicion. Some called him the monk in armor. Others said he had no soul left to save. He once confessed to the army chaplain that he no longer felt God's presence in battle. The priest smiled, weary. "Faith is not feeling, brother. It is obedience." Raymond bowed his head. "And if obedience becomes sin, then sin must be obedience, until heaven says otherwise." He never asked again, but the question followed him. Through the siege, through the dust, through the screams of the dying. When Jerusalem's walls finally fell, he did not feel triumph. He felt the earth itself recoil. He watched his brothers enter the city shouting psalms as they cut down men who cried the same God's name in another tongue. He saw priests bless swords before they dripped red. He saw a child clinging to her mother's body and could not tell which side of salvation she was on. He went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre expecting redemption, but found the floor slick with blood. Pilgrims knelt, thanking God for victory, their hands still shaking from slaughter. He stepped back into the sunlight, blinded not by glory, but by shame. That was when he saw smoke rising from the eastern quarter, a convent, they said, sheltering heretics and traitors. His commander shouted, "Cleanse it!" Raymond hesitated. "Do you doubt the cause?" the commander asked. He gripped his sword. "No, my lord, did only myself." He went alone, the command echoing in his ears. "Cleanse it." The word sounded holy, but in his mouth it tasted like ash. He remembered his mother's writing. "God is not found in conquest, but in mercy." The letters seemed to flicker in the firelight of memory. When he reached the convent, the door was already burning, the cross above it blackened but unbroken. He whispered, "If you are watching, tell me what to do." No voice answered, only the roar of flame, and then, through it, a single human voice, soft, steady, praying. It was not the voice of an enemy. It was not the sound of fear. It was a psalm. He stepped inside. The convent was a furnace. Heat moved like breath through its halls, whispering against the stone, devouring tapestries of saints. The air shimmered with gold dust and ash, as if heaven itself had descended in ruin. Sir Raymond de Vaux moved through the smoke with his sword raised, but his hand trembled. The cries of dying women had faded. Only one voice remained, calm, unbroken, echoing from the chapel. He stepped over fallen beams and charred pews, his armor scraping the walls. The voice grew clearer, a woman reciting the Psalms in Latin, her tone neither pleading nor afraid. He knew the words, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." But the way she spoke them sounded like forgiveness, not fear. When he reached the chapel doorway, he stopped. A nun knelt before the altar, her robes scorched, her hair unbound. Behind her the crucifix burned. Flames curled around Christ's outstretched arms. She did not turn. She prayed as if the fire itself were her congregation. Raymond's throat tightened. He had seen courage before, but never peace like this. He took a step forward, the floor crackling beneath his boots. "Sister," he said, his voice low, uncertain, "you must leave." She did not move. "If I am to die," she replied, "then I will die where he did." "The city is ours," he said, trying to sound sure of it. "No one will spare you." Her voice softened. "Then you will." He froze. "You don't know me." "I don't have to," she said, still facing the altar. "Only God knows you. That should be enough." For a long moment neither spoke. The fire crept closer, eating the wood of the pews, filling the room with smoke. Raymond's instincts screamed to move, to finish the order, to end this, yet his feet stayed still. "Why didn't you flee?" he asked. "Because I serve where he sleeps," she said, touching the crucifix with trembling fingers. "And if they burn his house, then I'll keep the door open for whoever remembers him." He wanted to believe her madness, but something in her words made the world outside, the shouting, the glory, the blood, feel smaller. She began to sing, a hymn older than his language. Her voice cracked but steady. He felt the sound move through the smoke like wind through bells. It was not for him, but it reached him all the same. He looked at the crucifix, the wood splitting, the figure blackening, and thought of his own vows. The church had told him that obedience was holiness, that God required blood to reclaim his city. But now, watching this woman pray while the world burned around her, he felt the hollowness of those sermons. He stepped closer. The fire glowed red against his armor, turning the cross on his cloak into a brand. "Do you hate us?" he asked quietly. She turned for the first time. Her eyes caught the light, clear, reflecting flame and pity. "I pity you," she said. He flinched, as if struck. "Why?" "Because you believe God needs your sword." The roof above them cracked. Ash rained like snow. He reached for her hand without thinking. She did not pull away. Her skin was hot, the pulse steady. "You'll die here," he said. "Then let me die praying." He gritted his teeth. "If you stay, you burn." "If you kill me, I burn faster," she answered. "Either way, he will see me." Something inside him broke, not like a wound, but like a lock. The silence of years split open. He saw her faith, calm amid the storm, light in the fire, and realized it was what he had been searching for across deserts and seas. Not conquest, not obedience, only presence. He raised his sword once more, out of habit more than purpose. The edge hovered near her neck. The light of the flames danced across it. She looked at him without flinching. "Do it if you must, but tell him I wasn't afraid." His hand shook. The blade fell, not forward but down, striking the stone with a clang that echoed through the chapel. The nun closed her eyes. "Then go," she whispered, "before you remember what you're supposed to be." He stood there frozen, staring at the crucifix as it burned. In its smoke, he thought he saw two shadows, the shape of the cross, and the outline of a man kneeling before it. Outside, the battle still raged. Inside, only prayer remained. And for the first time in years, Raymond understood which sound belonged to God. The flames moved like wings above them. The chapel groaned as though alive, the roof beams snapping, the stained glass falling in ribbons of color and ash. Yet within that ruin there was stillness, a small island of silence between one heartbeat and the next. Sir Raymond de Vaux knelt beside the nun as smoke wrapped around them like incense gone mad. He could no longer tell if the heat on his face was from the fire or from shame. His sword lay on the floor beside him, glowing faintly red at the tip. For the first time since he'd taken the cross, he felt no divine presence. No whisper, no command, no righteous wind. Only silence. And it was louder than all the battle outside. The nun still prayed, her words faint, the psalm half broken by coughing. She clutched the crucifix tight, though it burned her hands. Her lips moved, and though he could not catch the words, he knew the tone. Forgiveness. He bowed his head. Why does he not speak? She looked up through the smoke, eyes shining. Because you have already spoken too much. He stared at her, startled by the simplicity of it. The world outside roared with victory, yet here, amid ruin, her calm had the weight of eternity. He wanted to believe that God still lingered somewhere in this fire, but the longer he listened, the clearer it became. Heaven was silent because man had taken its voice. He rose to his feet, half from instinct, half from despair. You don't understand, he said. We came for him. She shook her head. You came for yourselves. The words cut deeper than a blade. He stepped back, staring at the crucifix above the altar, its wood cracking, its figure vanishing beneath soot. For a moment he thought it was gone entirely. But when the smoke shifted, he saw the faint outline of Christ's face, eyes half open, as if watching them both. He felt tears rising unbidden, hot as the air itself. We thought this would save us, he whispered. The nun touched the scorched floor beside her. Then look at what salvation costs. The sound of collapsing stone echoed from the hall. The roof was surrendering. The fire licked at the altar cloth, devouring the last vestiges of color. She turned to him. If you stay, you die. He nodded slowly. If I leave, I live wrongly. Then live wrongly, she said, but live long enough to repent. For a heartbeat they stood together, two souls suspended between destruction and grace. The fire seemed to pause, as though waiting for their choice. Then he moved. He grabbed her wrist, pulled her toward the doorway as a section of the ceiling fell where she had been kneeling. They stumbled out into the night. The courtyard was chaos. Bodies, broken statues, banners burning. But outside the chapel, the air was cooler. The stars were visible through the haze. He turned to see the doorway glow like the mouth of hell. Behind them, the crucifix collapsed with the roof, sending sparks into the sky. The sound was neither scream nor hymn, something between. The nun sank to the ground, her breath ragged. It's gone, she murmured. Raymond shook his head. No, it's still here. He pointed to her chest. If faith can survive that fire, then maybe it was never inside those walls. She stared at him, exhaustion softening her gaze. And where is it now? He placed his hand over his heart, his armor still warm. Somewhere it's never been before. The wind rose, carrying ashes through the air like ghosts. The city beyond still screamed, but to Raymond it sounded distant now, unimportant. The silence between them felt heavier, holier. He looked toward the horizon, where the Temple Mount smoldered against the night sky. He had dreamed all his life of seeing Jerusalem bathed in divine light. Now it burned, and he realized the two looked the same. He knelt beside her once more, eyes lifted to the stars that flickered faintly through smoke. "If heaven is watching," he said, "then may it see me as I am, unworthy." She whispered, "Perhaps that is all he ever wanted." The first drops of rain began to fall, soft, reluctant, hissing as they struck the embers. The sound filled the courtyard like distant prayer. He closed his eyes and let it wash his face, a baptism made not of blessing but of sorrow. For the first time he felt lighter, not forgiven, but seen. The nun rose unsteadily. "Go," she said, voice breaking. "They'll come soon." He nodded, hesitated, then pressed her crucifix back into her hands. "Keep it. If he's silent, make him remember." And then he was gone, disappearing into the smoke, leaving her to the rain and the ruin. Behind him, Jerusalem burned, and heaven said nothing. The dawn came gray and trembling over Jerusalem, as if even the sun was ashamed to rise. The city that had been promised to heaven now lay half in ruin. Smoke drifted above its towers like incense from an unholy sacrifice. The cries had faded, but the silence that followed was worse. Not peace, but the echo of what had been done. Sir Raymond de Vaux walked through that silence with blood on his hands and ash in his hair. Every street was a confession. He passed soldiers sleeping beside corpses, priests gathering relics from the dead, banners still fluttering in the wind as though victory were a prayer. But there were no prayers left. He found his way back to the convent as the sky turned pale. The fire had consumed most of it, leaving only walls that looked like bones. The bell tower was gone, its metal cross twisted into the rubble. The smell of burned linen and wax clung to everything. He half expected to find nothing, no trace of the woman he had spared, no sign of life at all. But as he approached the courtyard, he saw her sitting beside the well, wrapped in a scorched cloak, her face streaked with soot. The wooden crucifix still hung from her neck, blackened but whole. She looked up when he came near. "You returned." "I had to know," he said. Her eyes searched his face. "Know what?" "That mercy wasn't a dream." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward the city behind him. "They're still killing." "Yes," he said quietly. "And I am one of them." "No," she answered. "Not anymore." He knelt beside her. "Then what am I?" "Alive," she said simply. "Alive enough to choose." They sat in silence. The wind moved through the ruins, stirring the ashes into faint spirals. Somewhere far off, a trumpet sounded, calling soldiers to gather at the Holy Sepulchre for Mass. Raymond didn't move. She broke the silence first. "When they find me, they'll call me heretic. When they find you, they'll call you traitor." He smiled faintly, the first in years. "Then perhaps heaven will have to choose between us." The sound of boots echoed in the distance. He rose, glancing toward the street. "They'll search here soon. You must hide." "Where?" He looked toward the convent wall, where a pile of debris concealed a small hollow. "There." He knelt, cleared space among the stones. "Stay until nightfall. When the moon rises, the soldiers will be drunk. Then go east, toward the Mount of Olives." She hesitated. "And you?" "I'll lead them away." She caught his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "Why do this?" He met her eyes. "Because I couldn't kill you. And that's the first holy thing I've done." She let him go, her voice soft as prayer. "Then may that be enough." He helped her crawl into the hollow, covering the entrance with debris until only the faint outline of her face remained in shadow. Before he stepped back, she whispered, "When they ask what you saw here, what will you say?" "That the fire took everything," he said. "And if they ask what you saved, He looked at her, the flames of dawn flickering across his face. Only what still believed in God. She reached through the stones, touched his hand once, brief, warm, human. "Then God will find you," she said. He nodded, then turned away. Moments later, soldiers entered the courtyard, shouting his name. They saw him standing before the ruins, sword drawn, the air still heavy with smoke. "Report," the commander barked. "Convent's gone," Raymond said. "No survivors." The man smirked. "Then Jerusalem is clean." Raymond said nothing. As the soldiers left, he remained alone among the ashes. When he was sure they were gone, he looked once more toward the wall. No sound came from within, only the faint shifting of dust. He knelt and whispered, "If you still live, pray for me." Then he rose, sheathed his sword, and walked away into the morning light. That night, the nun slipped out of the city under cover of darkness. Some say she reached the Mount of Olives and built a small shrine there, praying for the souls of those who had conquered her home. Others say she vanished into the desert, carrying a charred crucifix that still smelled faintly of smoke. Raymond never saw her again. But each dawn after, when the bells of Jerusalem rang for victory, he would turn away. The sound felt hollow, like triumph morning itself. He had saved one life. It did not cleanse the city. It did not change history. But it was enough to remind heaven that mercy still breathed beneath the ashes. The conquest of Jerusalem was declared complete. The crusading banners hung from every tower, torn but triumphant. Priests washed the blood from the steps of the Holy Sepulchre and called it purification. The Pope's emissaries wrote letters of victory to Rome, and the surviving knights knelt to receive absolution. Yet no amount of prayer could cleanse what had been done. The city was silent, and in that silence, Sir Raymond de Vaux heard judgment. His comrades celebrated in the courtyards, their laughter echoing against the walls like blasphemy. Gold was divided, relics claimed, sinners forgiven. Every face glowed with the madness of men who had mistaken vengeance for holiness. Raymond stood apart, watching the flames still rising in the distance. The convent burned in his mind long after its ashes cooled. A brother knight approached, eyes bright with wine. "You should rejoice," he said. "We have freed the holy city." Raymond stared past him. "Freed from what?" The man frowned. "From unbelievers." "And what are we now?" Raymond asked. The knight hesitated, then spat at his feet. "Blasphemy suits a coward's tongue." Word spread quickly. Sir Raymond had faltered in the slaughter. Some whispered that he spared a heretic. Others said he fled from a demon in the fire. The more they spoke, the more it became truth. At the Council of Knights, he was summoned. The Grand Commander's voice echoed in the hall. "You hesitated before the enemy. Do you deny it?" Raymond met his gaze. "If mercy is hesitation, then yes." The commander slammed his fist on the table. "Mercy has no place in holy war." "Then perhaps holy war has no place in mercy," Raymond said. Gasps rippled through the chamber. He did not flinch. "Your sword is stained by doubt," the commander declared. "You bring shame to the cross you wear." He tore the red cross from Raymond's cloak and dropped it onto the floor. "You are dismissed from the order. Confess your sin and leave this city before dawn." Raymond bowed his head. "My sin was obedience." That night he walked through Jerusalem alone. The streets were cold, washed clean by rain. The fires had gone out, but the stones still steamed with memory. He passed the Holy Sepulchre, where priests sang hymns of victory, their voices echoing through the dark. He could not enter. He could not kneel before the altar built on blood. He wandered to the Mount of Olives, where the wind smelled of wet dust and olive wood. From there, he could see the entire city, a sea of flickering lights. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it looked like embers refusing to die. He dropped to his knees. "Lord," he whispered, "if this is your victory, then what is defeat?" No answer. Only the sound of the wind moving through the trees, whispering like the voice of the woman he had spared. He took the psalter from his belt, the one his mother had given him, and opened to a page half torn, half burned. The words blurred before his eyes. He traced them with a trembling finger. Mercy and truth are met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed each other. He closed the book and pressed it to his chest. "Let peace kiss me then," he murmured, "for righteousness has burned away." When dawn came, he rose, stripped off his armor, and left it by the roadside. He walked barefoot through the city gates, unseen by the guards who slept after their night of revelry. In his hands he carried nothing but the psalter and a fragment of blackened wood, the crucifix from the convent split down the center. He wandered east into the wilderness. There, he built a small shelter near a spring where the air was cool and the sand carried no echoes of war. He prayed not for forgiveness, but for silence that did not condemn. Weeks later, pilgrims traveling from the city found a man kneeling in the desert beside a small wooden cross. He said nothing, only pointed toward Jerusalem. They thought he was mad, but one among them, a priest, knelt beside him. "What do you seek, brother?" the priest asked. "Not heaven," Raymond said. "Only the place where heaven wept." The priest lowered his eyes. "Then you have found it." Years passed. His name vanished from the records of the order. His comrades became lords and relic keepers, their deeds written in gold. But among the monks who settled near the spring, a story survived. Of a knight who once held his sword above a nun and found God in the act of dropping it. They said that in his final days he carved a prayer into the wood of that broken crucifix. He won the city, but lost heaven's favor. No one ever found his grave, only a patch of ground where grass grew greener than anywhere else in the desert. Years passed, and Jerusalem changed hands again and again. Kingdoms rose and fell, languages shifted, banners faded, but in the shadow of the Mount of Olives, near the spring where the desert met the wind, a small wooden crucifix remained buried in the sand. It was half burned, its edges charred, the figure of Christ nearly erased. Yet one hand still shone faintly, the faint gold of an icon untouched by fire. The shepherds who passed the valley told stories. They said a knight had lived there once, a man who prayed not to win wars but to silence them. They called him the Templar without armor. Some claimed that when storms came, the ground above his resting place glowed faintly, as if lit from beneath. One spring, a group of monks from the Holy Sepulchre discovered the crucifix while digging for water. Its wood was brittle but warm to the touch. On the back were words carved so faintly they were almost lost. Not victory, but forgiveness. They carried it to their chapel, cleaned it gently with oil and tears. They placed it upon the altar, though no one knew whose hand had carved those words. The abbot declared it a relic of penance. Others called it heresy, a soldier preaching mercy when heaven had commanded conquest. But those who prayed before it said the air felt different, quieter, heavier, as though judgment itself had knelt. In time, pilgrims began to visit. Some came out of curiosity, others out of guilt. They brought tokens of repentance, shards of armor, rusted swords, blood-stained cloaks. One knight laid his own cross beside the relic and whispered, "Let this burn instead of my soul." They began calling it the Cross of Ashes. No miracles were recorded, no voices heard, no blind healed, only tears. The monks said that was miracle enough. Those who touched the crucifix swore it grew warm, that they felt a pulse beneath the charred wood, as if the heart of the man who made it still beat there. Generations passed. Wars came again. The relic was moved, hidden, rediscovered. Each time its legend grew. In Antioch, a bishop claimed it stopped a plague. In Acre, a priest swore it bled when touched by unholy hands. But when the armies of later crusades carried it as a banner, their victories turned to ruin. The monks said it was not meant for battle, that it burned those who tried to turn mercy into weapon. In the centuries that followed, the world forgot the name of the knight, but the crucifix endured. It traveled from chapel to chapel, from empire to empire, carried always by those who believed faith was not found in conquest, but in conscience. One chronicler wrote, "There was a cross once, black as sin and bright as grace. Men knelt before it not to beg for triumph, but to remember their tears." In a monastery near the sea, an old monk kept it hidden under a veil. When pilgrims asked to see the relic, he would lift the cloth just enough to reveal the words carved into its back. He would trace them with his finger, whispering, "The fire wrote this." They would kneel, and he would say, "This is the heart of Jerusalem, burned, but not consumed." And when they left, he would look again at the blackened crucifix and imagine the man who had left it, kneeling in fire, sword fallen, eyes lifted not to heaven, but to his own reflection in the flame. It was said that when the monk died, the relic disappeared once more. Some said angels took it. Others said the desert reclaimed it, hiding it near the spring where mercy was first found. But on certain nights, when the wind moves through the olive trees, the shepherds swear they hear the faint sound of metal falling onto stone. A sword dropped again and again, forever. And in the dust, they say, the cross glows faintly, half black, half gold, whispering the words that outlived the Crusades. He won the city, but lost heaven's favor. History would call it the greatest triumph of the age, the fall of Jerusalem, the cleansing of the holy city. Chronicles written in Latin ink would tell of miracles and glory, of angels guiding swords, of victory bathed in divine light. Yet the parchment never carried the smell of smoke or the sound of a woman praying while her world burned. The chroniclers did not see Sir Raymond de Vaux kneel in the fire. They wrote of salvation. He found silence. The First Crusade ended in triumph for kings and ruin for faith. The knights who survived returned to their lands bearing relics and stories. They were hailed as heroes, washed in incense and blessed by bishops. But those who had stood close to the fire, those who had seen what holiness cost, could no longer pray the same. Among them, some whispered of a man who dropped his sword in the burning convent, who walked away from victory and never returned. The Pope called it divine victory. The people called it prophecy fulfilled. The angels, perhaps, called it grief. For what is conquest if heaven is silent? What is Jerusalem if it must burn to be called pure? Sir Raymond's name disappeared from the rolls of the Templars, erased for cowardice, condemned by the church he had served. Yet his act, a single refusal to kill, became the one true prayer that rose from that city. The nun lived. Her faith survived, and in the centuries that followed, her name too was forgotten, but not her words. "If I die, tell him I wasn't afraid." Those words traveled further than any crusade. When later soldiers marched east beneath new crosses, they heard the story in whispers. Of the Templar who spared a woman and lost his soul to mercy. Some mocked it, some carried it like a wound. In a world drunk on holy wars, mercy became the only rebellion. The historians of later ages would argue whether such a man ever lived, whether the story was born from guilt or grace. But in Jerusalem, even centuries later, they said that on quiet nights, when the bells of the Holy Sepulchre stop ringing, you can hear the echo of a sword striking stone. Once, clean, final. That was his victory. No banners, no tomb, no relic bearing his name. Only that sound, the sound of disobedience made sacred. The church never canonized him. The order never forgave him. Yet in a way, heaven did. Because in the heart of fire, when faith demanded blood, he found something purer, restraint. The Crusaders took the city and called it holy. But the holiest act that day was not the slaughter. It was a hand lowered, a blade dropped, a life spared. Raymond had believed that obedience would lead him to salvation. Instead, mercy did. He won Jerusalem and lost heaven. But perhaps in losing heaven, he made it possible for the rest of us to find it again. The blackened crucifix he left behind became more than a relic. It was a question carved in wood and fire. What is holiness if it forgets compassion? Every war fought in God's name since has carried that question like a shadow. And if the angels still remember that night, they remember not the chance of victory, but the sound of one man weeping amid the flames, and the whisper that followed him into eternity. He won the city, but lost heaven's favor. Jerusalem stands still, but it does not forget. Its stones carry every cry, every prayer, every drop of blood turned to dust. The churches are rebuilt, the domes reborn, the hymns sung again. Yet beneath them, in the cracks of the marble and the shadow of the cross, the silence of 1099 still breathes. Somewhere under the city's oldest chapel lies a piece of blackened wood, half gold, half ash. The scholars call it artifact. The pilgrims call it relic. But those who kneel before it do not call it anything. They only listen. And if they listen long enough, they hear a whisper older than memory. If mercy survived Jerusalem's fire, it can survive us. The First Crusade was meant to win heaven. Instead, it taught men how far faith could fall before remembering grace. The banners of victory rotted, the kingdoms crumbled, and all that endured was the question no sword could silence. How can one conquer the city of God without losing the heart of God? Sir Raymond de Vaux never knew the answer. He walked into exile, nameless, stripped of armor and absolution. But his silence spoke louder than all the trumpets of war. He did not die as a hero or a heretic. He died as something rarer, a believer who could no longer lie to heaven. And perhaps that is where true faith begins. In the moment we stop pretending God demands what we destroy. The nun he spared lived long enough to rebuild her convent. They say she prayed for him every night until her hands bled. When asked why she prayed for her enemy, she answered, "Because he remembered God when everyone else forgot." History turned her words into legend, and legend into warning. The chronicles would later say Jerusalem was washed clean in blood. But heaven, if it watched, knew the truth. It was washed clean by one man's tears. And so the fire became parable. The burned crucifix became gospel without scripture. The act of mercy became the only miracle worth remembering. The wars that followed forgot him. The faith he fought for forgot itself. But the silence of his refusal, that quiet defiance, still echoes through every soul that hesitates before hatred. If mercy could live through the fire of Jerusalem, then perhaps mercy can live through us. For every city burned in God's name, there must be one heart brave enough to weep for it. For every soldier who raises his sword, there must be one who lets it fall. The church may forget his name. The world may call him coward. But the sky above Jerusalem still remembers his prayer and carries it in every wind that moves across its domes. He won the city but lost heaven's favor. And if there is any holiness left in history, it lies not in conquest, but in the mercy that refused to die.